Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Grace Christian Family Center in Tomball, Texas. Thank you for being here in person. Thank you especially for live streaming tonight. I know you stayed home because your marriage is a wreck and you didn't want to be here to make it obvious. So I'm glad you're live streaming, and I know your marriage is not a wreck. Well, I don't know that either, come to think of it. God bless you. Thank you very much for being here. We're going to cover the topic, a crash course for marriage wrecks. We're just trying to be funny, make a little play on words, but it is also true that sometimes marriage is really painful. It's not fun, it's not pleasant, and we think as Christians it shouldn't be that way, so we don't know what went wrong, and we don't know how to correct it sometimes, and we can sometimes both quote verses back and forth, and all the verses seem right, and we all seem right the way we use them, and still we come to an impasse. So I hope tonight we'll just throw some light on marriage itself and why we have some of the conflicts we do. So thank you for watching, and thank you for trying to make the best out of marriage that you can. We're going to cover about five topics tonight, I think, might be six. We'll see what we get to at the end. And we're going to start with just talking about the foundation. The very reason you married, and I know it's easy to say, well, I married because, you know, I loved him, I loved her, and that's, hopefully that's true. I know in some parts of the world marriages are arranged, but in most of the world marriages are an act of love. They are also an act of need. Even Paul acknowledged that sometimes marriage is the best antidote for immoral behavior. We get married so that we can have sexual intercourse, so that we can have intimacy, and so that hopefully that's not the reason we marry, but it's certainly a factor in the marriage. But you see number one on the screen and the notes over here if you're watching by live streaming, and I just put up there God's design. It is important enough, I think, to stress that this is something that's been going on for 6,000 years. It was ordained, created, and instituted by God, and that's why still to this day, it doesn't matter what country you live in, what the rules are for that country, what state you live in America. Some 30 some odd states in America honor a common law marriage. Some states require a number for a minister, registration, some don't. Doesn't matter what the rules are, who can marry you, and how the governments where you are have set it up. We ought to just think about this, if no other way, humorously for a moment. God said it in the very beginning of creation. He instituted marriage when there wasn't even a mother and father for anyone to leave, and that's the way it has always been. You got married because it's God's design for you to get married. Now, you may wonder if it was God's will for you to marry the person you married, and that's why we're talking about it tonight. But you got married because that's what we do. Think about this in the book of beginnings. That's what Genesis means. Genesis means the beginning or beginnings. So the book of Genesis is actually the book of the beginnings. This is the way God began. He began this creation. He began this plan. And the book of Genesis, written by Moses 3,500 years ago, kind of lays out God's plan for mankind from the very beginning. He starts with a man and a woman. We still honor male and female. At some point in those creative days, he says, and this is quoted in Genesis, he says, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and a man and a woman will leave their father and mother and cleave unto each other." And when you read that verse where it appears in the book of Genesis, you realize he's talking to Adam and Eve, and there is no mother and father for them to leave. So before there was even a mother and father in place, they would become the first mother and father. He ordained that this thing called marriage is what we will all do. And that's what you did. When you got married, you followed God's design. You don't really have a choice, I don't think, in it. It's the way we've been doing this for 6,000 years, and that's the way it's going to continue to be. Now, as far as the reasons, we can speculate why God chose marriage, but it doesn't have anything to do with our, well, it does have a lot to do with, our topic tonight, but it's not in our subject matter. I would speculate, for example, that the reason God ordained marriage in the very first couple was because in the book of beginnings, he is teaching us about the relationship that he wants from his created being. And so you can go from Genesis all the way through Revelation, and when you conclude reading Revelation, you will know with a certainty that God has chosen the bride of Christ, and that's everyone who believed in the Son of God. So New Testament opens with the Messiah, and we can talk about the theology of the Messiah all day long, but God gave us a Son himself in a Son, and so this Son of God was presented to the world, and the world rejected him, but because he presented a Son, he has also presented a bride unto himself. And so Revelation concludes the whole story of man with a rapture of the believers going to heaven to forever be with the Lord, and going to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And so the entire Bible concludes with the bride of Christ, which is the church, the believers in Christ, being ascended to go to a marriage supper with Christ and then forever dwelling with him. And that's the plan of God. It's marriage. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. God designed marriage from the very beginning to teach us something about him. He did not come along with the law because that's what he wanted. I want to give you all a law. I want you to live by laws and rules. He came along with a law to be a schoolmaster to point us to accept Christ when Christ came. That's what Paul called the law. The law is a schoolmaster. What's a schoolmaster do? It teaches you something. What did it teach us? It was supposed to teach us about Christ, who he was, who he would become. Isaiah prophesied about him beautifully, so that when he appeared that day, in fact, especially when he appeared as a 12-year-old boy in the tabernacle and lectured and taught the doctors of religious law there, they should have looked around and realized he's the only 12-year-old child from his entire era, because Herod killed all the babies from birth to 2 years old back then at that time because of the rumors that a Messiah had been born. And here comes the first 12-year-old boy into the temple to debate or to talk to the lawyers in that era. That should have been assigned to him as well. But the whole purpose of that and the whole plan from the beginning was God wanting to have a relationship with those people that he created. And he wanted it to be in marriage, a consummated marriage of the absolute best description of love you can ever have. And so that's what in that sense alone, our marriage is supposed to reflect what God wants with all of us. It doesn't often do that, however. Let's walk through some headings and try to explain what goes wrong in our marriages. When you see this question up here, most people would quickly probably think this is what we discuss when it comes time for divorce. When we're about ready to split and say, I'm going my way, you're going yours, I'll see you after divorce court. We just want to know who gets the boat. Who gets the boat, who gets the car, who gets the house, who owns what. But that's not our concern. We're not talking about divorce, we're talking about marriage. I'll tell you who owns what. Your spouse owns your body. Male or female, doesn't matter. Your spouse owns your body. 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter, verse 2. Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, let each woman have her own husband. I mentioned this verse a minute ago. Number 3, verse 3, let the husband render to his wife the affection she has a right to expect. I added that phrase you see in the scripture on the screen. It says the affection due her. Let the husband, this is New King James, let the husband render to his wife the affection due her. Likewise also the wife render to the husband the affection due him. Then I underline verse 4. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Verse 5, do not deprive each other. What does he mean? Do not deprive each other. He means from physical relationship. Do not deprive each other unless you do it with consent for a time, mutual consent for a time. That you, how long a time? That you may give yourselves to prayer and fasting, and then come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Notice what Paul did not say. Paul did not say, you better have self-control over your body, you nasty man or nasty woman. You just exercise control over your body. He didn't say that. He said you don't have good control over your own body. Therefore, remember that in marriage, that is part of your escape from that part of the world, is you have each other and you have each other for fulfillment. Why would he single out this language in verse 4? The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Does that excuse abuse? Does that mean a man could abuse his wife physically because her body belongs to him? Of course not. Not even, there's no remote possibility that that's what this verse means, because there are too many other verses, including verses about love, that absolutely eliminate any possibility of violence or brutality or meanness or cruelness in any way whatsoever. So it's not permission for a man to rape his wife. It's not permission to allow force or to abuse. Instead, by using the body in this phrase, in this context, he is simply saying this is where your intimacy comes from, and this is an act of presentation of pride, pride of a spouse, and this is also a willingness to submit to the feelings and the needs of your spouse. If that needs clarification, let me try to clarify it real quickly. When I at the bottom of the screen, when I mentioned that by using the body in the context Paul has used it, he is simply referring to intimacy. That is our greatest expression of intimacy, is physical intimacy. Nobody can read our minds. I can be intimate with my wife all night long in my mind, but she'll never know it. I can't read her mind. She can't read my mind. So there is no possible realm of intimacy in the mind. It just doesn't compute. Intimacy always involves a touch, a caress, a physical embrace of some kind. You can't just keep rejecting someone trying to touch you and not send a signal to them that you're off limits. They don't want to be touched. You don't want to be physically involved with them. You don't want to. The constant rejection of a touch sends the signal that the person is not welcome, not that the touch is not welcome. And so that's what Paul is trying to say. There has to be a degree of intimacy in this marriage. That's why you married. That's one of the reasons you married, was to fulfill the human need for intimacy. And everybody has that need. And then presentation is just a matter of pride. When God in the Old Testament starts describing his favored nation, Israel, and he starts telling her the land that he's provided for her. And then he starts telling Moses how to make the priest dressed. And then at one point he starts describing Israel like he would describe a woman, and he wants to bedeck her with jewels. And he literally describes how she will be bedecked with jewels. And we know it's figurative because she's not a woman, but what he's trying to say is, my love for this nation that I have singled out above all nations through Abraham, my love for her is equivalent to the love that a man feels for his wife. And he wants to adorn her and give her the physical things of beauty that she might want. So he is using a human parallel to describe his spiritual parallel. As a man wants to adorn his bride, so I want to adorn Israel, my love. And then he would carry that right over to the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. So there's a matter of presentation there. Nobody would be real enamored with a spouse who just became absolutely sloppy, lazy, don't care. I don't know how long it would take your spouse to want to distance himself or herself from you if every time you walk through Walmart you just passed gas on every aisle, and you never had your pants pulled up, and your zipper was always unzipped, and your hair hadn't been combed in a month. and bugs were crawling on you. That there's just something wrong with that whole picture, and is not endearing to anybody, and it wouldn't make anybody proud to say, oh, that's my wife, or that's my husband. And so that's why he singles this out. He doesn't say, oh, as long as they just feel your soulmate chemistry and the heart is connecting to your heart. That's baloney. You don't know how that works. How does the heart connect to a heart? I don't know. I know when people start having affairs, it's always because I finally found my soulmate. Well, how do you know it's your soulmate? How do you know that this person is just not doing more physical things to you and for you than your spouse is? Maybe he or she is just adorning themselves a little nicer. Maybe they wear a little underarm deodorant once in a while. Maybe they even put on a dash of cologne. Maybe they dress up now and then, comb their hair. And that has tremendous appeal. The eye is more to a man than it is to a woman, and the feelings are more to a woman than they are to a man. We often say that men are attracted to what they see. What they see is what they want. A woman is attracted to what she is made to feel. She feels respect. She feels love. She's attracted to whoever makes her feel loved. That's a very good description of the difference in male and female. David, the king, had a harem of wives, but he looked out the window of the palace and saw a woman bathing on a rooftop, and he wanted that woman. He wasn't just aroused because he saw a naked woman bathing and wanted one of his wives. He wanted what he saw. And as wrong as, and that was a sin, and as wrong as that sin was, God did eventually forgive him, but there was a price involved in that sin as well, as you all know. And so that's the whole idea of men. That's why pornography is largely a man's crime and a man's sin. Men are aroused by what they see first, and then they deal with the heart. Women are aroused by the heart first, what they feel from a man, and then the sight comes in as a secondary thing. So Paul still uses the body that way because it does fit all of us, even if one is a little more rapid than the other. So keep this in mind. Who owns you? Your spouse owns your body. That does not mean that you're the slave. They control you. They can manipulate you. They have power to make you do what they want. It means that they now, the third thing on there, it means that they now must submit to you as much as you submit to them. If my wife's body belongs to me, then she must be conscious that I want to touch my wife and I want to be touched by her. She has to keep that in mind. If my body belongs to her, then that means I have to be conscious of whatever her wishes are, whatever her needs are. I have to be conscious of her desires. That's the idea of your body belongs to your spouse. So you can't just live selfishly through a marriage. It's my way, the highway, and she just better pay attention to me. Nope, it doesn't work one-sided, it works two-sided. So whatever you would think a wife would have to do to you if you're a man, she would also have a right to think you have to do to her, and that is pay attention to her particular needs and live the way she wants to be treated in that relationship. Who can make you happy is our next topic. And this is critical to most marriages because sometimes, for some reason, we just get the idea we're not happy because of this person. So I'm just going to ask the question to start with, who can make you happy? And I'm going to answer it now. Nobody can make you happy. Not one human on earth can make you happy. No thing can make you happy. All the money in the world can't make you happy. I feel bad about calling any names, so I won't. But let me just suggest to you to put two and two together when I say, one of the richest people in the world quite often on the news, well, maybe two of the richest people in the world quite often on the, let me elaborate, two of the richest people in the world quite often in the news have had divorces recently, and they're gazillions rich. You mean money didn't make their spouses happy? You mean they weren't happy with the richest men in the world? Of course not, because money can't make you happy. A man can't make you happy. A woman can't make you happy. Nobody can make anyone else happy. If I were to ask you, and I won't, but I have asked in seminars in the past many years ago for people to define happiness, and I required it to be written down for a while, and it was always interesting because you never think about it until somebody asks you. Right now, in your own minds, watching, if I ask you to define happiness, if I said to you right now, what is happiness to you? Well, just answer it right now in your mind. Go ahead and give me an answer. Just think about it. What is happiness? And you're going to stumble for a moment. I mean, I know you're going to think of things like not worrying about anything, being content, not having any problems. Is it euphoria? Of course not. You can't live in a euphoric state all the time. You know, the Bible doesn't ever say, and you have a right to the pursuit of happiness. That's in the Constitution. That's, you know, you're granted the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness in the American formula. But it's not a biblical formula. And so if you look it up in the dictionary, the first thing you'll find is the quality or state of being happy. What is happiness? Well, it's the quality or state of being happy. Okay. What's number two? I left the letter showing barely so you know there's a number two coming. What's number two? Well, number two in the dictionary, happiness, good fortune. Oh. If you won the lottery, is it still up to $1 billion something? Anybody know? Huh? 1.6 billion. If you won the billions, that'd be good fortune. Would you be happy? I love the stories out right now. Somebody put a whole book together of the people whose lives were ruined after they won the lottery. What a tragic book that must have been trying to write. People who won more money than they'd ever dreamed of having, and then within a short time, their kids were drug addicts, their wives or husbands didn't want them anymore, they lost their friends, they came to not trust anybody because everything became about money. So good fortune is a definition of happiness in the dictionary, but it's not happiness, and it can't buy you happiness. Pleasure, you can't have pleasure all the time. Contentment, you can be content. We don't ever think of contentment and happiness being exactly alike. Joy, I don't know. Who can make you happy is our question, and I'm just going to ask a question bigger because we're talking about marriage. Is it marriage? Is that, I mean, you know, when we pledge our love to somebody and we go through that ceremony and we get to that honeymoon and we get back to start living life and paying bills, we just think life is going to be wonderful now. But if you were miserable before you married, you probably are going to be miserable after you marry. Do you really think that yoking yourself to another human being is a way to find happiness in life? It cannot make sense to think that. A marriage is a yoke. It means I no longer get to do things like I want to do them. Even if I know I'm right, I can't do it right. I got to do it wrong to please my wife because she's a dingbat and she thinks it should be done that way. And if I don't do it that way and do it my way, she's not even going to talk to me tonight or sleep with me. I'll be on the couch. So I got to do it like a dingbat wants it done and then smile about it and say, well, let's try it the other way, just so she'll be happy. I know I didn't describe anybody's marriage right there. I know you wouldn't do that. I know you're smarter than I am. But I've tried to probably, never mind. We'll just move on to the next page because this is going to get deeper and worse. Here's what Jesus said about life, just life. Matthew 7:13. Jesus, remember this classic verse? Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. Many there are who go in by it. But narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life. And there are very few that find it. It's a difficult path, but it leads to life. That's what Jesus said. And Jesus is still talking in John 16th chapter. I have told you these things so that in me you might have peace. In the world you will have trouble. But take heart, I've overcome the world. You know, here's Jesus promising you you're going to have trouble in the world. Do you really think marriage is going to eliminate trouble? Of course not. Whatever trouble you would have had single, if you live 50 years single, you're going to have double that trouble married, because you're going to have your trouble and his troubles, your troubles and her troubles. And I know, the good phrase is, well, you share the load. It makes it half as light. I know. And you also carry two loads, makes it twice as heavy. I'm not telling you. Well, Paul did say, I wish everybody's like me and they wouldn't get married. You know why he said that? He clarified it himself. Because a married man seeks to please his wife, and the unmarried man can just seek to please God. And he wasn't being silly about it like I'm silly half the time. Paul was actually being honest. What is a married man's greatest goal? Please his wife. He'll please God, but he's got to please his wife first. There's nothing wrong with the idea of putting your spouse first. And when Paul said a married man seeks to please his wife, he was exactly right. And in fact, a married man knows if he doesn't please his wife, he's probably not even going to be able to connect to God very well. Why would I say that, you say? I'll tell you why I say it, because in Matthew 5, Jesus said, if you come to the altar to bring a gift to me, meaning praise or sacrifice and offering to him, and there in that place of surrender to God and holiness and praise, there you remember that your brother has something against you, first, go be reconciled to your brother. Let me just replace the word brother with wife. So if you come to the altar to offer your gift to God, and there you remember your wife is mad at you because you crossed ways with her and you went nutty, and she's not happy with you, and things are really strained at home. Now here's what Christ would say. First, go be reconciled to your wife. Then come back and offer your gift to God. And then he will accept it and receive it. So you understand why Paul was right when he said, because a married man seeks to please his wife and the things of his wife. And that's not an indictment. That's just the way it's supposed to be. But he doesn't try to do that because he probably does do it because he's trying to make her happy. But that's not the purpose of doing that. You can't make her happy any more than she can make you happy. Paul, jumping over to Paul the Apostle in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and 4, Paul said, rather as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way. And then he describes how we commend ourselves as servants of God. Well, in great endurance, we've gone through tons of trials and troubles and hardships and distresses, and these are the things that commend us as believers. You get married, hardships don't go away. You don't stop enduring things because now you're married, everything's going to be wonderful. You're not going to get rid of troubles because you're married. And so I'm just asking, if you thought marriage was going to prevent all of that, you're just mistaken. Marriage doesn't prevent trouble in life. And happiness does not come from marriage or happenings. You know, they both have the same root word. Happiness and happenings come from the same root word. So the idea behind that is, hey, you'll be happy when everything happening around you is just right. Well, that might be true, but I don't know about you, I've never known everything around me to be just right. And so maybe I've never experienced happiness for that reason. I think the Bible's emphasis, since it doesn't use that word that way, happiness that way, I think the Bible's emphasis would be on contentment. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Learning to be content, Paul said, in whatever state you are in. And so that kind of attitude, rather than an always needing to feel happy attitude, contentment brings us back to what Christ said, my peace I give you. World doesn't understand it. It's not what the world gives you, but my peace I give to you. And so you can have the peace of God through every trial, through every ordeal, through every problem, every trouble that comes, every financial loss, every death, every ordeal of every kind. You can have peace of God in that, and that's a much better goal than thinking that you just have to be happy. And inner peace can bring contentment in everything that happens, and life is going to have many things happening in. So you can find happiness if you call it contentment, and contentment comes from a peace in God. Now, next topic, let's talk about lovers. It is hard to leave a lover. You did not marry and not think of yourself as a lover. Everybody loves love. If you love love, then you love a lover. If you don't love love, then you can just take a nap during this little session right here, this portion, because we're only going to be talking about lovers. It is hard to leave a lover. I have talked to many couples in, 50 years, 49 years. I have talked to many couples in 49 years who, as a last resort, came to the pastor on their way to divorce. Sometimes it's like they just need the pastor to understand so that he won't be judgmental if they go ahead and get a divorce. I don't know exactly if that's right or not. I'm just guessing. But I have spent a number of conversations in 49 years with couples on their way to divorce court if something doesn't miraculously change them. The pastor doesn't have a magic wand or holy water he can sprinkle on them to make the marriage work. The next step will be to attorneys, or they might have already talked to attorneys many times. And one of the simplest things I've ever tried to tell anybody is that it's just very, very hard for any man or woman to walk out the front door and leave a lover. It's just hard to do. I'll tell you what's not hard to do. It's not hard to leave a critic behind. It's not hard to leave a complainer and a whiner. It's not hard to live somebody who chooses to be miserable all the time. They're just constantly miserable. They're not ever happy about anything. No matter what subject you bring up, they can whine and tell you what's wrong with it and how bad things are in the world or politics or church or God or the Bible or school or education or kids or anything. Just everything is bad. It's not hard to leave that kind of person. It's not hard to leave someone whose greatest value in life is they simply remind you of all your failures. That's not a hard person to leave. Not a hard thing to leave somebody who reminds you made a promise one time. You made a vow. You stood there and made a vow. It's not hard to leave people who just remind you that you made promises. It's not hard to leave a liar or a cheater. It's not hard to leave, as Paul, using Paul's description a while ago, someone who withholds. Don't withhold. Don't defraud the other. It's not hard to leave someone who withdraws from you constantly. If you try to touch your spouse every night for 20 nights in a row, and every time you roll over and touch, there's a twitch and a jerk and the cover's coming, you don't feel any love from that, and after a while you think, I'm just going to quit trying. And then when you quit trying, you don't just lose your passion or feel. You just get angry because you quit trying, because there was no point to trying anymore, and that's not a hard person to leave. And we're not talking about Christian vows and, oh my God, you shouldn't be saying that. We're Christians, we're supposed to be committed. It's not hard to leave commitment. See, love and commitment are not necessarily the same. Folks that have come to this church for a while have heard me make a distinction between committing to God and surrendering to God. I can commit to a job. I can commit to a principle. I can commit to a verse. I can commit to a human. But that doesn't make me a lover. It doesn't make me surrendered to them. I can commit to be the best Christian I can be, but not necessarily be surrendered to the perfect will of God, not really listening to Him in my heart, not allowing Him to awaken me from my slumber and lead me in a direction He wants to go, because I'm fully committed to the course that I charted for myself and my church and my life and my beliefs and so on and so forth. Sometimes in marriage, we're committed to an idea, but we're not lovers to the person we're married to. So I'm just telling you, for what it's worth, you can leave a critic, a complainer. You can leave a miserable person who's always unhappy. You can leave someone who just reminds you of your failures in the past, or who reminds you of the vows you promised you were never going to leave me, and now look at you. You can leave somebody who lies to you constantly or withholds from you constantly. You can. If you want to know what a lover is, the Bible actually defines a lover, and it does it so wonderfully in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. This is the definition of what a lover is in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. I just cut the verses out and just put the definitions as they appear in the New King James. A lover Someone who loves you is patient. They're patient with you. They're kind to you. A lover is not jealous of you, not suspicious, not sneaky. A lover doesn't boast and is not an arrogant person. A lover is not rude. A lover doesn't insult you, doesn't embarrass you in public. A lover does not insist on his way or her way. A lover always thinks of his lover's way. A lover is not irritable or resentful. This is not a definition from a paperback book sold in 1979. This is scriptural definition of what love is. A lover does not celebrate being bad, being mean, being corrupt. Instead, a lover always promotes the truth and truthfulness. I will tell you the truth in all things is what a lover says. A lover bears every trial, believes you, is hopeful in all circumstances, and endures every bad thing that will ever come along. That's what a lover does. You see it? You want to hear it one more time? A lover is patient and kind. A lover is not jealous. A lover does not boast, is not arrogant. A lover is not rude. A lover does not insist on his way or her way. A lover is not irritable or resentful. A lover does not celebrate meanness and badness, but promotes truthfulness. A lover bears every trial that comes along. A lover believes his lover, her lover. A lover is hopeful, and a lover endures every bad thing to come along. I say again, it is hard to leave a lover. I have said to a lot of people over the years, more men than women, men would come talk to me more often than women would when they were going through crises. And I would say to men, every morning you need to look in the mirror and you need to just ask yourself the question, what kind of man do you want to be today? Now, I started that when my wife and I were having some problems at about 38 years old or so, thereabout. We got married at 23. We went broke at 25 and had a baby that year. We had a second baby 3 years later in 78, and I was working as a minister and making $800 a month gross income. Taxes required me to pay taxes on $1,400 a month because of an old house provided and a car provided and a couple of benefits. So there was little to no cash left over. And we were always strapped, bought nothing new for a long, long time. And then after 3 years of there, kind of internship, if you please, after 3 years of there, we went to Dallas, and we didn't have any money saved because I was making $800 a month gross and trying to bring 2 kids into the world and try to figure out how to buy diapers. Literally one time, now big church, but I was an intern, associate pastor intern. So I'm learning. I got to work with every department 3 months to, gain my internship, if you please, my wings, and learn. One time, food was so short that when I came in, my wife said, "We don't have anything to eat. We've got some crackers, we've got this, we've got something else." I wasn't going to go ask anybody for money, and so I literally threw a rod and reel in the trunk of my car. We were in Port Arthur. I drove over to Pleasure Island. I don't think I had a fishing license. I didn't care. I stopped and got a little bit of bait, and I threw a hook out into the Sabine Lake, and as fate or God would have it, I caught a redfish. I mean, that quick, a good-sized redfish. I didn't measure it. I didn't care. I caught a redfish. I reeled it in, and I quickly gutted it and threw it in a bag in my trunk. And about 2 minutes later, I caught a flounder in Sabine Lake. A good-sized flounder, love flounder. Easiest fish in the world to clean. So I pulled that sucker in, quickly cleaned it, threw it in the bag, came home, got out in the driveway, cleaned them off right, scaled them off right, filleted them, We had fish and crackers for dinner. Don't have a lot of pride when that's the way you are. When that's the kind of provider you are, you have no pride. There have been so many things like that in our early years. It'd be easy for my wife to just constantly remind me of my failures in the past. To her credit, thank God, she does not. She never has. And she could do it on many occasions, but she doesn't. But at about 38 years old, I was finally making a little bit of money, not in church, but in private enterprises. And I was feeling a little bit, I said 78, not 78, when we were 38. I was finally making a little bit of money in Tomball, but I was making it on the side, had some side jobs, and not cheating, not doing anything wrong, just suddenly woke up one day and realized that now life ought to be better. I had left that place, gone to Dallas, and made some tremendous money for 6 months before I came to the church that I'm at now. So I made tremendous money, drafting and designing, and I got contracts with 2 major companies, and had to hire some draftsmen to do the work and making a little money off the top. And at one point, I was throwing a newspaper because I didn't have anything when I went there, no money. And so I just called the Dallas Morning News, and they let me throw a newspaper for $400 a month. God bless them. And so I bought a little $150 Dodge Dart on the side of the road. And not immediately, but after I'd thrown papers in our one good car that had been given to us, after I'd thrown papers in that car for a couple of weeks and got a paycheck, I found a $150 Dodge Dart, and I bought it because the newspaper gets fuzz everywhere. So now I'm throwing newspapers. I'm trying to be a dignified man. I've pastored one church, been an associate at another, and now I'm throwing newspapers just trying to get my rent paid. And then I started putting bids out, and they started, finally a few of them started coming in. And then I was just working nonstop. I slept about 2 to 3 hours a night, but I was making $67 an hour or so in 1978. And everything was looking up now. And then we came to this area, and I had saved enough money just in 6 months to make a down payment on a new house, and bought a new house, and then found out that the previous pastor's salary was going to be cut to 1/3 of what he was being paid. And so came into only making $1,000 a month in the church. And that was all right. I would work other jobs. So I took other jobs, and I started making money on the side. And at 38 years old, I didn't really have any financial problems. Finally, we had money in the bank, and we had a nice car to drive, and everything was all right. And somewhere in all those struggling years, I felt disconnected from my family. Not by anybody's fault or choice, just that I was working. For 6 months, I worked. I had a drafting table in my dining room in our apartment in Dallas, and I would come in late. I would get in at 7 or so, and she would try to have dinner ready, and I would say hi to the girls and eat dinner, and I'd play with them in the floor for a minute, and then I'd say, Daddy's got to go to work, and I'd go to the drafting table and start checking the drawings from 8 draftsmen that I had working on different projects, and I would check those drawings until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then just try to lay down and crash for 2 hours because I still had to throw the newspaper at 4. And I could have quit it, but I was so thankful to them for giving me a job quickly on the spot. One day, I just felt bad about quitting it, so I kept throwing that paper. And then I would come back and shower and clean up and go to my jobs. And at 38 years old, I realized that I didn't love her, she didn't love me. I didn't know my family. I didn't know anything about life, marriage. I didn't even know why I was preaching in a pulpit. I didn't know I just didn't know. I thought that everything was wrong. Some of you have read one of my stories at Chicken Soup for the Soul Bought, and it was about me laying down on the floor at that time of life, and finally one night just laying down after everybody was going to bed and saying, God, you're not listening to me anyway. You do not listen when I pray. And I think I'm done. I think it's time for me to just, in the morning, I will tell my wife that I'm sorry. My kids, I just got to go somewhere. I don't know where. I'll resign from the church. I will just get out of everybody's way and stop making everybody else as miserable as I've made myself, because I don't think that you even listen when I pray. I don't think you've listened to anything I've said. And I think that the best thing for me to do is just get away from everybody. And 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang, which always meant in a pastor's home, somebody's sick or somebody's dying. And at 2 o'clock or so in the morning, might have been 1:30, but I didn't go to bed till midnight, so it was long after I'd been in bed. Woke me up. I grabbed it quickly, Princess phone in those days, no caller ID. I grabbed it quickly so it wouldn't wake anybody else up, and I said, hello, as quietly as I could, and a voice on the other end that I did not recognize. A young man who said, is this Danny Carpenter? I said, it is. And he said, are you the guy who has written some articles in some magazines? And he named them. I said, yep. I had a column, newspaper column. I was writing for a couple of magazines. I was selling short stories. I was terribly unhappy. And I said, yep. And so he said, and he qualified me again. Are you the one that wrote so and so? I said, hey, that's me, bub. You got me. What's going on? He said, look, you don't know me. I'm from, and I think he said from the Waco area or somewhere up in that part of Texas. I'm almost sure he said the Waco area, but it was, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I wasn't expecting to want to remember this conversation, so I wasn't paying attention. And then he said, listen, a couple of weeks ago, I felt like God laid it on my heart that I'm supposed to call you, and I don't know you. And I said, okay. He said, I think God gave me a message for you to tell you. And he said, I just said, God, that's crazy. And that guy would think I'm insane. And so I put it off. But I'd wake up at night saying, you got to call him. I'd wake up again, you got to call him. And he said, I laid down tonight. I have been crying. I've been praying. I can't sleep. I can't even close my eyes tonight. I'm so sorry it's this late. And he keeps apologizing. And finally, I just cut him off and said, look, dude, you got me. We're awake. Just go ahead, Barrett. Hurry. I want to get back to sleep. I got a kook on the phone. I mean, he's an idiot. He's clearly out of his mind. You're going to call me a total stranger? You got my number from other ministers, and you're going to call me and say, God told me to tell you something, but now I'm too embarrassed to tell you. You're an idiot. So I didn't tell him all that. I'm thinking it, and I just finally said, will you please just cut to the chase? Tell me what you think you're supposed to tell me. I'm trying to yell at him without waking up my wife. And he said, okay, but it's only 2 words. I said, just say it. Okay, here it is. God hears. Does that make any sense to you? And the moment he said it, I flushed with embarrassment in front of God. How could I dare be so presumptuous of God to think that he didn't hear me when I prayed, that he wasn't listening when I called on him? He who numbers the hairs on my head and records my downsittings and my uprisings, but he's not listening. He's not capable of understanding me. I just whispered to the guy, I said, listen, trust me, it makes more sense than you think, than you can imagine. It makes more sense. You've done your job. We need to hang up now, but thank you, and trust yourself. You did the right thing. Click. I needed to slip out of bed. I think my wife might have grunted, who was it? And I said, it's the wrong number. And I slipped out and went down the hallway, went back in the living room, and I needed to get right back in the same posture that I had felt like I was in before. I got as close to that laying on my face with my face in the fiber of the carpet as I could get, so that I could get right back in that spot and say to God, this is where I left off a while ago. This is where I quit you, and I am so sorry. And so I started apologizing to God, and the down burst, and I wept and cried, and I made things good with God. Now, I think in my mind, I thought when everybody wakes up in the morning, my life is going to be sunshiny, and it didn't. I think I thought, just because God and I had a reconciliation, that tomorrow my wife and I would be reconciled and everything would be cozy and wonderful, and she'd love me and I'd love her. But nothing changed. It was the same frostiness because I'd been frosty. It was the same uncertainty because I had been uncertain. It was quid pro quo. It's just what I had been, she had learned to be back. And that didn't change because she didn't have that on the carpet experience. And God saying to a stranger, call this man and tell him God hears. On the very night that I said, you're not listening to me, God. And then a stranger just gives me 2 words from God, God hears. Now, that was undeniable to me, and have never gotten away from it. Will never, ever question God again on hearing me. I believe God listens to everything I say. I still do. But that didn't solve my marriage. So at 38 years old, I said, you and I need to go to a counselor. And so we started going to a counselor. We went to a good man named Dr. Lewis Caldwell, author of a few books. And we got some good advice. One of the things in that conversation with him that he challenged me with was being a good man. And that's when I started looking in the mirror every morning. And still to this day, I'll look in the mirror and say, what kind of man are you going to be today? And I want to answer my own question. I'm going to be a good man today. I'm going to treat people fair. I'm going to treat people honest. I'm going to try not to hurt anybody. I'm not going to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not going to let mine get hurt. I'm not going to have road rage. I'm going to treat my wife right, love my kids, love my wife. I'm going to be a good man. Don't say it in all those words, but that's the idea. And now I'm ready to start my day. And I've said that to a lot of men over the years. Do this. When you get up and start your day, just say, look in the mirror and say, what kind of man are you going to be today? I modify it for this marriage seminar. And I would ask you men and women to look in the mirror every morning for a while and just say, you want to be a critic today? You want to be a complainer today? You want to be a boss or a controller of your spouse? You want to tell them how the cow ate the cud today? You want to be a good person today? And then climax it with, you want to be a lover today? And that's better than saying you want to be a good person. And I will modify my own behavior when I think of myself as a lover instead of just being a good person. When I think of myself being a lover, it reminds me that God himself said, here's the first commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. He didn't say be a good person because God's watching. He said, love the Lord your God. Remember, that's why he started marriage in the garden? Before they had mom and dad to leave, he takes the first couple and says, for this reason, men and women will leave their mothers and fathers and come together and cleave to each other. For what reason? Because he said so. It's his pattern. God himself has wanted love ever since he made Adam and Eve. Ever since he started this creation project called Humans on Earth, he has wanted love from us. We give him everything but sometimes. We give him commitment, we give him money, we give him service, we give him time. We even keep count of it sometimes. I worked for the Lord this week. I did this week. I've volunteered for that. I committed to that. And all he says plainly, the first commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart. I would challenge everybody watching this in the morning when you get up, go look in the mirror before you go to work and start your day. And don't just ask yourself, what kind of person you want to be? I want to be a good man. Ask yourself, you want to be a lover today? Well, it starts with loving God. You step in that shower to start your day, you step in there and love God for a little bit. Lord, you're gracious to me. You're kind beyond belief. You ignore my flaws and my faults. You put up with my stupidity sometimes. You wrap your arms around me and embrace me when I'm not embraceable, when I'm not even trying to love you. You're still loving me. So forgive me for the times I've not returned your embrace. Today, I'm going to start returning your embrace. And when you start doing that to God, guess what will happen to you in your relationship with humanity? A man who loves God with all his heart, mind, soul, and strength learns to be a lover. He learns to submit to God. He doesn't learn in love to tell God how it's going to be today, God. Here's what I want you to do for me today, God. I want you to do it this way, and I want you to do it that way, and I don't want to wait till tomorrow. I want you to do it. And that's not what a man who loves God does. A man who falls in love with God says, Lord, make me what you want me to be. Lead me where you want me to go. That same man or that same woman who learns to love God that way takes that same love into marriage, and they can say, Lord, I love my wife. I love my husband. Teach me how to love them the way I love you. And what he'll teach you is just what we just now said. You'll look at your spouse and say, tell me what you want from me. Tell me what you'd like me to be. Tell me what would make life better for you. I just want you to know. Came home from one event one time. My sister had found some old silent movies from our early days, and when my wife and I got engaged and had an engagement party, they didn't have sound movies then. It was Super 8s without sound. And so she thought it was fun to find them, and so I went up to see my mom and went to the lake house. My sister, my brother, my wife stayed home. It was just my turn to go check on Mom. I went up to the lake house, and she turned on the little video thing on the wall, you know, the Super 8. Everything looked a little bit faster and jerkier than usual, but you can still, you got it. You know who these people are, what they're doing, and you can read their lips sometimes and tell what they're saying. And I don't know what it was. It was just our engagement party, family there, and gifts there, and I just walked around and, you know, thanking people and being me. And but seeing me for the first time at 23 years old on that screen, I didn't like me. I didn't like the me that was there. I looked at me and I thought, you arrogant little snot. You little arrogant show-off. My gosh, do you even notice the woman sitting there that you're fixing to marry? Probably not. And there was just something so disturbing to me about me on that video that I drove home 4.5-hour drive back from North Texas. And all the way home, I'm thinking, my wife's going to think I'm crazy. How can I apologize to her? And I walked in the house. She said hello, peck on the cheek. I go over, put things down, get luggage of my overnight case out of the car. And then I'm thinking, if I don't do this now, I'll talk myself out of it tomorrow. And she's in the kitchen getting something to drink. And I just walked around and leaned on the counter and said, I just got to tell you something. And so I told her, you know, my sister had these Super 8 movies, and I got to watch it. You know, you'd probably enjoy seeing them, maybe. And then I just told her what I just told you. I hated myself watching me in that. And I wondered why in the world you would have married me. I wouldn't have married me. I don't know why you married me. And so for what it's worth, I'm just apologizing to you. I'm apologizing to you for being me, for being what I've been. I'm asking your forgiveness for putting up with me for all these years. God bless her. To her credit, she started rolling tears down her face and shook her head and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Now, part of that's dementia, and you know, you can explain that better than I can, someone here. But part of that is just not knowing. She's older now. Well, this was several years ago. So maybe she just really had forgotten. But I'll tell you what I think the other part was. That's what love does. There's a verse that says, love hides a multitude of sins. It's easy to leave somebody who keeps bringing up your failures. It's hard to leave a lover because lovers don't bring them up. Lovers hide them. Lovers pretend they never existed. Mothers do that, so do lovers do it. So that's our message tonight. You can be whatever you choose to be. And I'm going to leave it at that right now. We're going to leave pride out of it and go right to this. You married because it's the designed thing to do. Your body belongs to your spouse. Nobody can make you happy. You have to choose to be happy yourself in every circumstance. It's very hard to leave a lover. Sometime in the future, we'll talk about how hard it is to agree on money matters. But they really have no power to break a marriage up. if that marriage is based on the love we have just talked about. Thank you for tuning in and watching. God bless you. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next week.